everybody. I think you are in the town hall. It's hard for me to tell, but I've been told I'm live, and I hope we have the sound fixed. I'm going to ask somebody that's listening to say if that's all right. Yeah, we don't have any questions yet. That's what this time's for. So if you're here as a participant, questions, maybe no one's going to show up because the workshops are so good, and that would be fantastic if that actually happens, or no one knows how to get here. That could be the other problem. All right, so we'll wait, I guess, until we have questions, because I'm preaching to the choir. According to the participants list, there is no one else in here, I don't believe, other than you find people I know and share the head table with. So I don't believe we've started, or if we have, people can't find this, or it's very uninteresting and no one's showing up.
Bishop,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that we didn't do earlier that I think might help is if we tell everybody else is on a live stream and you're on the Chime site. And if you look down in the green box in the lower left corner, you see where it says a Q&A, and that is actually where you can enter your questions, and those go to a back end. And we have a staff person, Josh Hornbeck, who is watching for the questions and will then be sending them to the bishop by text.
Yep, that would be important to tell them. That's good. I
know. That's why I thought I'd interrupt you and do that. So if you're on the live stream and you have a question for the bishop, type it into the Q&A in the green box on the main page of Chime.
Yeah, there are 236 of you out there, so amen for that.
And somebody's got to have a question out of 236 people.
So I'll open it up, and really I want to talk about what you want to talk about. I think we decided to do a town hall because it was well received on June 7th. I think when we did it, we had nearly 1,000 people show up at that eventually, and I enjoyed doing it. We do have time sensitive because I think we're going to stop at 11:30, but if you'll put your question in the Q&A, if you have a question, and that's where I'd like to launch from, is what you want to talk about. And I think Josh Hornbeck is monitoring the Q&A, so if you put that in there, it'd be a good practice also for us to practice Q&A and see how that works. So that's all we're waiting on is a question. With 236, there have to be one. Josh is saying, how do we find the Circles of Color video? That video, and I don't know if Josh can come on here or not, but let me say what he told me this morning is that he put it out on social media. He also sent it to the Across the Diocese list, I believe, and to all the clergy. There may be another way to get to that has been put up, because that happened last night and they had to work to get it into a phase they could share, but they've got that now. So we will try to put a link up so that you can go to that, because I think it'd be very good for you to look at, to watch if you couldn't attend last night, because a lot more information was given about what's behind it. So I hope that answers that. Maybe we can actually put that up before this town hall's over, so you have a link directly to it. I have a question here. Let's look at this. I don't plan to, on some of these, I don't plan to say who asked the question, so there will be anonymity for you if you desire that. I will try not to say your name. I believe the first question is, how many parishes do we have that are people of color struggling with unpaid leadership? Well, we have more than I would like. That is an issue in congregations that are built around ethnic ministries. That has been an issue. And when I almost a decade into my time as bishop, I was becoming even more concerned about the fact that when we have that issue, we don't have We also do not get people of color to be priests. Now, in the last few years, we have really tried to do that. And we do have many in the process. And I think we're getting really close to ordaining some of those. But I will say that there's still an inequality because of just what you're bringing up, that often we can ordain them a priest, but that doesn't mean that they can always get remunerated in an equal way. So you'll notice that some of these resolutions are about us trying to rectify that in the ways that we can. And many of these congregations are growing, they're missions, so they're typically like any mission in trying to grow. And eventually some of them will get there, and that's typical of any mission. But the answer is, I don't know the exact number. I can think of 3 or 4 right off the top of my head. And I would say that there's not an equality in it yet. The one thing still about our polity in the Episcopal Church always is the economic inequality of local parishes across the board, but especially often with ethnic ministries. I hope that answers some of that. Kyle Davison I said I wasn't going to do this. Sorry, Kyle. I think you'll be all right with it. How do you see our efforts at addressing systemic racism aligning with efforts at the level of the national church or other dioceses you're familiar with? Well, I think, it's like anything. I would say there are some that are ahead of us. For instance, the Diocese of Maryland has been talking about reparations for a couple of years and have done a lot of work with that. And we're looking carefully at that. The Diocese of Atlanta has a Center for Racial Reconciliation. And we're also currently looking at that in hopes that we may be able to do something similar here. And for Province 8, which Province 8 in the Episcopal Church is the western part of the United States, all the West Coast, Hawaii, Taiwan is in Province 8. And so we have some hopes, and this comes from the ethnic ministries, Circles of Color. This is one of the things on their list, is us developing some similar center. So we're working with them and trying to look at how we might do that. But I would say my personal belief is we're behind, because I would say everybody's behind on this, but we're definitely, we're very focused on it. And as I said in the address, I think it's going to be the bulk of our work going forward. And I mean that for several years. So I would say we're really on it in the sense of getting started. And we're watching dioceses that are ahead of us. And Maryland is one that really stands out for me that's ahead of us, especially on the discussion of reparations. Let's see. All right, question. Bishop, how is COVID-19 impacting giving across the diocese? It's a good question. I think there's more fear about that than reality, although of course it has affected some of the giving. But what I see is in the places where this is addressed head on, and I would tell you, any of you that have attended any stewardship workshop I've ever done or heard me speak about this, I typically will tell you that any place that meets the discussion of money and giving head on, in the end does better, no matter what the crisis is. But I would say, partly thanks to the PPP loans that most of our churches did ask for and receive, and through the great generosity of the people, giving has been surprisingly still high. And that also, if you do historical research on giving in crises, the church often does the best in those times. and that's especially if people are truly wedded and committed to the church. And I think many of our people are. So some of you have heard me say this, but for instance, in the beginning of the pandemic, of course, all of us had a little bit of the sky is falling syndrome going on. And one of the sky is falling syndrome was we were in this camp too, but many of the dioceses across Province 8, for sure, I know, we're thinking we need to relieve assessments. And we consciously decided not to do that in order to truly see the data coming in, what really happened with giving. And so we have, because of good stewardship, we do have a reserve where we could relieve assessments, but we decided because of the unknown character of this pandemic, and now we know it's going to go on a lot longer than we had hoped, and we still don't know how long. Because of that, we decided to not do that immediately, and so far we haven't had to. Now in Province 8, I chair that bishops group, and I asked them early on how many of them did relieve assessments, and I think all of them did that I asked that day, except us. The issue with that, of course, is that now many of them do not have a reserve to do whatever, to cover whatever emergency might happen now. So generally, we've been surprised too to see that people are keeping up with their assessments, and you're going to get more detailed reports about that in this convention, but generally it's kept up pretty well, which I think is a good sign. Thank you for asking that question. Let me see, I'm trying to keep in line here. Here's one that come in. Greetings from the border country of Southern Arizona. Looking forward to tomorrow's speaker and discussion, and thanks for shutting off the Echoplex. Yes, whatever that was. I sorry about that too. I had no idea from where I was that was happening. So I apologize as well. All right, next question is, can you give us a few examples of some of the good things you've seen going on in the diocese since March? Well, yes, I can give you lots of examples. The first of which is the way just about every parish we have pivoted to serve their people through whatever means they could garner through the web. For instance, live stream, Facebook Live. I've just been so inspired. And one reason we did the all diocesan worship that we did on June 7th was, of course, to try to bring us together. And we intend to do that again. We see the Eucharist tomorrow, the live stream from St. Mark's, as another version of that where we gather together as a diocese, but we will do the June 7th again, especially if we stay in this. But we did that to really see how difficult it is to do it. We did it 1 week, you do it every week, and that is the number one thing I've seen, the incredible thing. But I'd say second to that is the way this diocese has had a heart for making sure the people that are most affected by both pandemics and by the despairs that I brought up in the address are being cared for. I was just so impressed with the great desire, the anxiety about how to keep feeding people, how to keep housing people. There was not a consuming self-absorption like we see in so many places. That was not going on in our church. And to me, that one thing, and it comes in many specifics underneath that, has been the most heartening thing to see and the most inspiring thing to see. There are many good things. Third, possibly to that, is just that I think all of us went through, and I would include me and the diocesan staff, through kind of a moment of thinking, well, this will be over quickly, kind of sitting and waiting for us to get back to normal. But once we realized that that was not going to be the case, that we're probably in this for the long haul, I also have just been extremely inspired by the way we were able to turn and to keep being the church in the world, keep being out in front, and in many ways through live streaming and Facebook Live and virtual worship, we have learned some things that we probably should have learned long ago. We certainly have been talking about them, but we just weren't forced to do it. And I think that's been a great thing. And I believe when we come out of this, we will probably, many places, stay virtual, especially larger places. And so a great gift that's come out of this is our abilities in that area, and also pushing up the infrastructure, which we've been doing. Our office really tried to put money on the table for people to upgrade their ability to do virtual worship. And we were really inspired by how many congregations took advantage of that. And we were happy that although we had to find other money to make this a reality, that we were able to award every one of those, even though it was way more than we had first thought and first budgeted for. So I think really good things are happening in that area. Let's see, I'm trying to keep in line here so that everybody who comes forward. I think I'm going to try to paraphrase this. I know when you're texting, it's hard. What are we planning to do as a diocese about the issues the pandemic has made worse? Deferred maintenance of unused buildings, financial precariousness of churches, etc. Dennis Turney, who's our property manager, has been thinking about this. He's actually got a really good white paper on what we need to be doing during the pandemic to make sure that that less deterioration happens. So we've sent out he has sent out several times, and I've helped try to do that to help him get that out. The list of things we need to be looking at in our buildings and really doing weekly in order that there's not deterioration. I mean, from my office, we are constantly, especially the board of directors who oversees capital assets in the diocese, are looking at, and have been long before this pandemic, at the deferred maintenance issue and trying to help the local be able to have the resources they need to do it. For instance, a couple of years ago, they asked every congregation, and in fact, the missions, we made them do this because we could, to get a real inspection of their building so that they might develop a strategy for long-term maintenance to keep the buildings up. That's still true, even though it may be more true now that we're in a pandemic. So our job in the Office of Bishops, I think, is the power to convene, like we are doing right now, the power to convene, to pull us together, to share our resources as much as possible and to share our skills. And we'll keep doing that. If what you're asking is monetary, monetary also does go through the board of directors, and we certainly are helping those congregations where we can who have a monetary issue. But I will say, deferred maintenance was a big issue before this pandemic. And Dennis has been trying to send out information, and we'll do that again. And if you need it directly, we can get that to you, about what needs to be done locally so that we don't come out of the pandemic once the doors open with too much deterioration and deferred maintenance. Let's see. This is the next question. I'm deeply touched by your response to systemic racism and hope to copy it. I have a question about vocabulary and practice. Is there an alternative to the words people of color that conveys the same need for healing, reconciling, and justice? I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina, where the signs started and signs of colored and whites only were prevalent. Is there an offense to some using persons of color from a historical context? I'm going to ask, if she will, Ariane, our canon to the ordinary, who has been working extensively with our anti-racism work that we just started and is really over that, I would say, and leading me on that, and the wise one trying to guide me on that, to enter into the conversation on that question.
Yes. Hi, I'm Ariane, the canon to the ordinary. There's no perfect language. And a thing that I've learned is that words are hurtful, and there's some that most of us agree are so hurtful we generally don't say. And then there's some that have meanings that are different for different people. So for me, these days, I'd probably identify with that newish acronym, the Black Indigenous People of Color, BIPOC is sort of how we've been framing it, to be clear that people of color have really different experiences, backgrounds, and origin cultures, but that actually the hard part is if we don't use some phrase, it makes it seem like we don't have something in common. And in my experience, I have a lot in common with Black Americans who experience certain kinds of racism, but I have other things in my experience that I don't share with them in common. So an acronym like BIPOC can help reflect that there's diversity within that category, people of color, that we don't get if we think about this as just we're all one people, or there's Black and white people, or even there's Indigenous and white people. The reality is some of us have built a coalition to try and address our experience of white supremacy. And I haven't experienced, so some groups in our diocese are using ethnic ministries to describe that. There would be the same semantic issues with that. Someone, at least one person has said, well, if you say ethnic, it makes it sound like that's everything but white, and that white isn't an ethnicity. There's semantic problems with almost every moniker we could choose. And so we're trying to use terms that we define and make clear what they mean to us, and then being in open conversation and receiving feedback about how you experience it. And I know as someone from the South, that's going to be, that phrase means something different to you. It does to my dad, for instance, who grew up in the South Side of Chicago. Colored means something to him that it didn't mean to me. That is not how we have used that phrase.
Thank you, Ariane, very much. And being from the South myself, this questioner, I know the signs you're talking about. Sadly, I've seen them, especially much more in my earlier life. And it's a great question. And I think Ariane's answer should stand. Thank you for that. Next question is, Bishop, can you explain the process whereby an interim priest is assigned or selected to serve in a parish? So I'm going to make sure this questioner, first of all, let me explain that we have missions in parish. Missions are much more attached and less autonomous. And they are directly connected to the office of bishop. So in other words, if you're in a mission, you know that your priest in charge, is their title is vicar. Vicar literally comes from the word vicarious, of the same root, vicarious, and a vicar is vicariously the bishop in that congregation, because the bishop is technically the rector of the mission. But in a parish, and that's what this question said, parish. So I'm going to go, parish has a little bit more autonomy. They They work with the office of the bishop, but they really, their leadership, their vestry, working with our office, gets to be in the selection process for an interim. Now, interims have been difficult in this time. For instance, if you have a transition in the middle of the pandemic, an interim's been more difficult because we're talking about virtual worship. We're talking about them getting to know a congregation by Zoom, and not by contact. It's one of the many stresses that are on clergy right now, trying to do something that is so different from the very close contact that we're typically called to in this vocation and that we usually work in. So that's been difficult in this time, but even in this time, the process that you're asking about really is pretty much the same. And we've had pretty good luck putting interims in even in this time, but it's just not like many things, quite what we would want it to be, where you get to sit down with them, you get to maybe go see where they are, or whatever. The other problem is just availability. So sometimes we can present more than one name as an interim, and sometimes we have to come to the congregation with just one name for various reasons, and maybe the only person we have. And I want you to hear this. Let's say we only had one person, but our office, for whatever reason, deemed that the person wasn't a good fit and maybe even had other issues that concerning to us. That would be, we may be dealing with, we don't have any options. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we definitely try to avoid the warm body syndrome, where we just get somebody in there who has a collar. We do think match is important, even for an interim. So I hope that answers your question. That's pretty much the process. RN, who you just saw come on and speak, is Canon de Ordinary, and typically she oversees that process. She works with you on that process and works with the vestry on that process. And sometimes interims are right here in our diocese. Sometimes interims come from outside the diocese, pretty much like priests do, even if they're coming to serve full time. But interims vary. Sometimes we decide with the lay leadership that interims are only going to last, let's say, 3 months, and then we'll be on to hopefully finding a full-time rector. But sometimes those are longer. We may decide together in collaboration with the leadership that an interim needs to be a year and a half, let's say, or 2 years. We've had interims as long as 5 years. So it does depend too on that. What are we looking for long term? What's the strategy for and what needs to happen in the interim period? The last thing I'd say about that is typically we don't, interims are also on a spectrum. Sometimes it truly is a priest to be there to do the services until you can call your next priest in charge. But many times there are specific things that need to happen: healing, reconciliation, conflict management, that need to happen in that interim period, which will make it very contextual about who we need to come in and do that specific period. For instance, we've had some places that are really financially a disaster in an interim period. So we would look for someone who at least has a good understanding of how that works and what needs to be done. So we do try to be contextual. We try to make a match, and we try to truly work with the lay leadership locally about what needs to happen in that interim period. I hope that answers it. All right, let's keep going. In general, how many parishes and missions in the diocese have half-time or less clergy? And I may ask RN to come on and chime in on this. I'll try to give my rough idea about that. And how many are without clergy right now? I would say without clergy right now is not any higher than it would be in a non-pandemic time. But I would say that the cycle changes no matter what time we're in. And Ari and I think will attest to this, that, there are times when we have 20 openings and we're trying to fill them, and there are times when we have 2. And then we have 20 again, and then we have 2. I will say, and some of these questions are dancing around it, so I'm just going to say it, that this pandemic time has been especially stressful on clergy. We're going to do a workshop for just wardens and lay leadership on November 14th, I believe it is. We're going to ask your clergy not to come, and we're going to lead it on how to take care of clergy through these stressful times, because we're seeing lots of fatigue and lots of stress. And that is leading to many of them looking at early retirement, wanting to get out of this because it's so stressful. So, if you have a priest that you really love, it's time to love them. And it's time to care for them and to check in on them, because that is happening. But I would say, at least in my oversight of this, it's not any more than usual. Now, the actual number of half-time and full-time, I would say we've been fortunate to keep most at full-time. But of course, we do have some that are half-time and have made that choice and have stayed there. I do, and any of you that have worked with me that are on this town hall on this issue over these 13 years know that if we try to make that decision in a transition to go from full-time to part-time, I'm always very cognizant and concerned, because I will say this: I believe that any decision to go part-time from a full-time position is really a point almost of no return. In other words, we rarely see a place go to part-time and get back to full-time. It's a legacy choice, is often the way I will put it. And it really needs to be strategic and not just economic. In some cases, our office is actually, because the finances have been difficult in those situations, have supplemented the congregation in order for them not to go less than full time. Because when you go less than full time, often the candidate pool gets much smaller, because there are some priests that just can't do that and aren't going to do that. And it changes the dynamics of a parish and how it operates, and who's in charge of what and who has responsibility for what. That can be done well, don't get me wrong, but it is a strategic choice. It can't just be an economic one. So Ariane, do you want to add anything to that? Maybe you have better numbers than me too, at any given day. I don't know where we are on numbers.
Yeah, I fear I might not have more specific numbers. Even the question of how many congregations don't have clergy is a fuzzy one, because if you want to talk about purely without an assigned cleric, there's probably less than 5 or so. If you're talking about in transition, we're probably at about 15 to 20 at any given time right now. In terms of the half and full-time position, it's the quickest gut check I could do is just run through the congregation grades. And I'd say if you're looking at our congregations by how large they are, our congregations that are in the A, B, and C column almost all have full-time clergy. Our congregations in grade D, about half or more have full-time clergy. And in grade E, which is honestly where more of our congregations are, almost all have part-time, if that makes any sense. So it is actually fairly related to size of budget and size of congregation.
Yeah, thank you. So really, I think by those numbers, and I'm glad to hear that, because I was going to be close, that probably 20% of our congregations, that's missions and parishes, are in some kind of transition clerically. That means that 80%, 75, somewhere around in there are stable at the moment. And of course, this changes every day for lots of reasons. I hope that answers your question. Next question. I've been questioning the role of Christianity in general and the role of being Episcopalian in the sin of slavery and the further sin of white supremacy. Seeing the violent and historic groups like KKK come out since 2017 has rocked my world. Also, how can we become one people with worship and community when the history has been segregation? Well, it's a great question, and it relates directly to the work that I brought up in the address. I mean, I'm just going to give you my thoughts on that, and I guess that's why you're asking for my thoughts. It won't be everyone's thoughts, and I guarantee you many people will disagree with this, but I think the way we have to start that is by owning what you just said, owning it, that we have been part of the problem, and then owning that we want to be part of the solution. And I would say the Episcopal Church is not, it certainly has not done that. It's nowhere near done. But I would say the Episcopal Church in history has at least voiced this and has tried to do this, and have had people that have really championed this more than some denominations. But we have lots of work to do. We still have lots of work to do on this. If you didn't pick up on it in the address, I'm saying we're just now starting that and really digging into that in the deep way I think we're going to need to. And it's going to be deeper, and it's going to be more unsettling, I think, as we do it. But that's the way we're going to get through it, is if we can truly own that and then begin working on it. If you didn't pick up on this, and I'm not always a very good preacher, and convention addresses are especially difficult in that regard. But, if there was a tagline today, the tagline was, what kind of people do we want to be? What kind of body do we want to be? And how are we going to reveal to the world the Savior that we follow through our actions and through the work that we do? And I think that's our way of changing the world, is being an example to it. But we've got to be an example to it. And too often in all of our history, in the history of Christianity, the church reflects society instead of the society reflecting the church. Always our goal should be, I think, as Christians, for us to have an impact on the greater society in this regard too. So I think ultimately, we're trying to be an example of reconciliation but first, reconciliation can't happen until we own it, grapple with it, make amends for it. That's why I'm not afraid of the word reparation. I keep bringing it up. I think we have to figure out what that means for us and how that becomes a reconciling event for us and not just something to check off the list. So to me, that's how we're going to get to that. It's a great question. It's going to take far more than this town hall to dig at it, but we always need to be asking it, and we always need to be questioning our response to it. Next question is, I've found people to be very generous in keeping up pledges. Where we are hurting is because of COVID-19 is in the loss of rental income because of building closures. Absolutely. This is happening in a lot of our congregations because many of them did, in fact, make a way for income to come into their congregation by using the facilities that we have. That's good stewardship, but that's been curtailed. And that is where we're seeing some of the stresses. I'm so glad this person brought that up, because that's what we're seeing. The person in the pew, the person that loves and reveres their local congregation, they have kept up their pledges. They have been generous, but we're seeing losses in other places. And I think exactly what this person is saying, those losses a lot of times have been in rental income from other entities who cannot now not do what they do, and they can't use your space to do it. So I believe that's right. Next, people love the diocesan worship. I think this is referring to June 7th, our worship. Any chance of doing that again on Christmas Eve, which will be really difficult to do in a full way in the smaller churches? Yes, we are. I don't know if it'll be Christmas Eve. Please don't quote me on that. But that's certainly on the list as a possibility. What we struggle with is, for instance, Christmas Eve, many of the places that can do live stream won't want us to do it then because they can do it and want to do it. But we do hear totally what you're saying, is that we may do it for those who find that more difficult to do. Now, on this one particularly, we may be able to work with the live stream at St. Mark's and do Christmas Eve that way and have everybody tune in. Typically, I'm there on Christmas Eve. The dean and I switch off preaching. I don't know whose job that is this year, but we switch that off, and we probably that's what we'll do no matter what. But our plan is to keep doing those as long as we're mainly in this virtual world. What we learned from that is that people really did respond and really did like being all together. And the town hall after that, we got that impression too. And we would do something like that as well, because that conversation was a great conversation. For those of you that joined it, it went on for 2.5 hours, which we're not going to be able to do today, but I loved it too. Being a flaming extrovert, I loved it. And we do plan to do it again. That's the answer to that question. When it's a mission, how big is that congregation? Well, it depends. Mission is only a designation. It really doesn't depend on, for instance, average Sunday attendance or budget. I would say typically a mission is a smaller congregation, maybe a newer congregation, but that is not always the case. Some congregations actually they make a conscious decision to stay a mission because they want the closer oversight and the closer connection with the office of the bishop. Probably more prevalent is those who want to not be a mission anymore, to go the other direction on that. And, just to move in the cycle of growth that congregations are trying to make. But an example would be my first congregation when I was a priest in Arkansas. It was the 5th largest congregation in the diocese. It was, and it had one of the larger budgets. I don't know where we stood on that, but we made a conscious decision to stay a mission for quite a long time. In fact, they didn't become a parish until after I left. And because we wanted that connection, we didn't mind being a mission. And we were also growing so fast that we went through transition points. If you've done the size model of churches, we were busting through those, every other year. And when you're in that cycle, you still need help to move to the next cycle. So we didn't want to get out of that relationship with the diocese. That's not always the case, and it's far more prevalent that it would be smaller places, but we don't decide it, is what I'm answering that question, based on average Sunday attendance or budget or anything like that. It's a collaborative decision. Now, if you're a mission, you do have some markers that you've got to get to in order to become a parish, but those aren't onerous. And in fact, most places, if you're growing at all, will eventually come to that decision if you want to be a parish or not. I think the most recent one we had was, I think at last year's convention, is St. Benedict's Lacey. That has been a mission for a long time and became a parish at our last convention. I hope that helps. Let's see. All right, I'm just trying to got texts coming in from all kinds of people. So there's, could the bishop please repeat the Barb Fox news? I heard it, but following this specific stream was nearly impossible. Yes, I don't know what important things I said in that first part that no one got, but yes, I will respond to that. Barb now lives in an assisted living place called Harbor Point. It's up in Mukilteo, and but in this past week, she had a pretty serious setback. She had a serious eye infection behind one of her eyes. They got very close to her brain. She was taken to Harborview. She was in Harborview for a week or so. It was pretty tenuous in the reports from her family. But her daughter reported to me this week and Wednesday of this week that they had arrested that infection, and she was back at her assisted living apartment. So that's what I said then. So thank you for asking. A few have asked why we aren't doing in-person worship when the Catholic Church is. How do you answer that? We are being cautious. I've known of 2 churches elsewhere that went to live streaming and had outbreaks. Yeah, I actually got that question yesterday, so I've wondered if the Catholic Church isn't feeding the question to you to ask us. I don't know, but anyway, the way I answered it yesterday, because I literally was asked, is to say that we are being overly cautious. I'm being overly cautious. I don't mind saying that. I'm monitoring CDC and local health officials, as well as local advisors that are science and physicians. And we're trying our best to be as careful as we can be. What I find in that research is that still at this moment, probably the major super spreading events, when they can locate these, are in houses of worship. And so, I trust very much that the Roman Catholic Church is doing this safely. Everything I've seen tells me they are, but it will only take one outbreak for that to be turned around. And, I'm taking very seriously that every personal contact we have right now is a danger. It's a risk. The other thing we are hearing, and in the last 48 hours, we've heard this, especially that now the rates of infection are happening with people and places where we let our guard down. And we do, as humans, have this belief that, oh, this is my relative. There's no way they can be infected. This is my best friend. I see them every day. There's no way they can be infected. It's a false myth in our mind, but that's where it's being spread. So any indoors over 15 minutes, even with mask on, are a concern. And I'm far less worried now scientifically, and this is being shown more and more, that touch is as much of a problem as we thought it was at the beginning. What's often called fomite transmission, or that's less of an issue, although I'm still very careful. I still sanitize my hands. I still think we need to wash our hands and all that, but the spread truly is aerosol. It truly is a mask and social distancing. And that's the best answer I can give, is to be honest, that we really are trying to follow health officials and not to push it just for the sake of saying we did. We have to be careful. And when I look at our demographics, this is definitely something we've been working on and need to work on more, but our demographics are that the bulk of our congregation is in the high-risk group. And to my surprise, they are the ones too that most want to come to the church. So when I've done virtual worship and some outdoor worship now, and at least one indoor worship myself on my visitation, I can tell you that when you get people in a room that have been gone for months and you tell them we're going to gather again, but we're going to do it like this, just human ability to do the new thing when you're in a familiar space where you always did the old thing, for instance, running up and hugging someone or shaking their hands, or is very difficult to do. In some of those first virtual worships, I found myself managing some of that by, telling an acolyte, for instance, no, today you're not going to do what you typically do. You're not going to walk up to me and hand me this and that. I'm going to do all that myself. And it's hard on them too, because of course they have it built into them. This is what you do. This is what I do. This is my role. And so the reason we're insisting the reopening protocols be in place long before we reopen, in actuality, is so that we can begin sharing with our congregants how things are going to change and what needs to be followed. So that's a long answer. It's not a specific answer. The way it got asked of me yesterday is, why can they do it safely and we can't? And what I would say is, I don't know totally that they're doing it safely. And, what safely means is different for everyone. What I ultimately know is that any contact we have is a risk. So that would be my answer to that. Let's see, I'm going on here. How many churches in the diocese have opened for in-person worship, and have any then subsequently decided to discontinue the in-person worship, and what was the reason? I don't know that we've had, we do have some that are open. They're meeting with limited capacity. And that seems to be going well in the places that can do it. As I've shared with the clergy over these weeks, larger places are really the ones making a choice not to meet again until, some have even declared until there's a vaccine. Some have declared phase 4 will be the first time they meet in person. We have had a few that have attempted to open maybe for a one-off service to see how it would go, and then have decided to go back to virtual. And I will say, after all this time of being virtual and being apart, even when I go and make virtual visitations now, and in Mount Vernon recently, we actually did a service inside. When you're in the midst of that, you notice things that can worry you. And so my experience has been that some clergy and many of the lay people, after we practice that once, come out of it thinking, maybe we shouldn't do this yet. And so there have been a few that have done that, kind of gone back. But I would say it wasn't official reopening. It was kind of trying something and then realizing we're not ready yet to do this every single Sunday. And I think that's a good thing. Those stops and starts probably will happen, and I think they need to happen. They're good learning experiences. But I think this goes to the last question too, is there's some concern, especially right now, that we're seeing the second surge. And, we've heard some of the health professionals telling us that we're in for a very long, dark winter when it comes to this virus. So I am worried about us reopening and then having to pull back because we're back into a very serious situation of spread. So there's some reticence about rushing to reopen because of that too, because I hope we don't get there, but I am seeing signs that we may get there. So I'm a little bit worried about it. Okay. I have that it's 11:30, and I have no more questions, which may be my timekeeper kind of saying that's going to have to be it. I really, really appreciate you all being here. It was so great to find you because I thought nobody showed up, and then there are 250 people that showed up. I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think it's time for us now to let you have a break. And then we will reconvene, as I said, in our session at 12:45. That's when you need to be logged on. And we will begin promptly at 1 o'clock with our opening prayers, and then a call to order shortly after that. This afternoon is when we'll be doing voting and resolutions. It's very important for you to be there. And yes, I've just been told there are no more questions. Isn't it great when it works out like that? I'm so sad not to see you all. If you didn't get a question answered that you wanted to ask, please just send me an email and I'll get to it eventually. It probably won't be today or tomorrow, but I will get to it if you really want to ask a question. So bless you all. Let's take a break, and we'll see you all back at 12:45 and then 1 o'clock call to order. Blessings.